Hello and welcome to today's Dark Reading webinar, Closing the Container Security Gap, Key Insights from the 2026 State of Vulnerability Management and Remediation Report, Container Edition, sponsored by ActiveState and broadcast by Informatech Target. I'm Michael Krieger from Dark Reading. I'll be your moderator for our discussion today. And containerization has become critical to modern production strategies, yet security maturity is dangerously lagging, resulting in an alarming 82% breach rate and widespread audit failures. Today, we're going to dive into the critical paradox uncovered by ActiveState's report based on a survey of 250 DevSecOps leaders here in North America. On that note, I'm excited to introduce our speakers today. I'm joined by Morris Chen, Vice President of Customer Success at ActiveState, and Evan Prowse, Product Marketing Manager from ActiveState. But before I hand it over to you, Evan, I just want to remind our audience of a couple of things. First of all, this webinar is interactive. At the bottom of your screen, there's some buttons you can click to learn about our speakers, download the slides, share the webinar via social media outlets, and most importantly, participate in the Q&A session that's going to take place at the end of our webinar. You can also use that Q&A area to let us know if you're experiencing any technical issues, and our team will do our best to assist you. Okay, let's get to it. Evan, the floor is yours.
All right, amazing. So thanks, Michael. And hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join today's session. So as mentioned, today we're really here to talk about closing the container security gap and specifically dive into some insights from our 2026 State of Vulnerability Management and Remediation Report, which is entirely focused on containers. And so what are we going to do today? Let's jump into the agenda. So we'll start with just a brief introduction of the report itself, maybe some information on the methodology, who we actually talked to for this, and then we'll take a deeper dive really into some of the key statistics we think are really worth highlighting for today's session. And Morris and I are really basically just going to have a conversation on what we found in the report, how that lines up with what we're seeing from our customers, and really the market at large. And I think hopefully what this does is it gives everyone a few things to think about if you're either ramping up your container usage, maybe you're just getting started moving a legacy application to modern infrastructure, or you're just thinking about strategies for open source security for the upcoming year. And so, Michael already introduced us, but I want to take a quick second just to give myself and Morris a chance to sort of tell us what you do, or tell us what we do, and go from there. So Morris, why don't you take a second and tell us who you are and what you do at ActiveState.
Thank you, Evan. Good morning, everybody. Morris Chen, I'm the VP of Customer Success here. We manage a small team of field engineering as well, which is really closely tied to what we're going to be talking about today and how we help our customers secure their open source environment. Joined the company 2 years ago. I am based in California, very close to San Francisco. Pleasure meeting everybody.
Awesome, thanks, Morris. And then just quickly, I am on our marketing team, specifically covering product marketing. And so I think, sometimes no one wants to hear from a marketing person, but I am sort of working very closely with our customers, talking to users. And so I think, my perspective is hearing some of these challenges firsthand from the market. And I think between Morris and myself, we can give everyone a pretty accurate picture of what we're seeing. Okay, so, I think just quickly for those of you who are joining us live or watching this back and might be unfamiliar with ActiveState, it's probably quickly worth just touching on who we are, what we do, and really why we're here to talk to you about vulnerability management and remediation at all. So ActiveState has really been around in the open source space for the past couple of decades. We really got started by helping customers take languages like Perl, Python, and Tcl and really bring them to the enterprise by porting them to Windows and helping with sort of the long tail support on those languages. Over the years, we've really continued to refine that ability, not just of building open source, but sort of greatly going out and expanding what ecosystems we can actually support, their dependencies, and the modern infrastructure requirements teams have today. And so a result of that work is we've now assembled a catalog of about 40 million secure and continually updated open source components. We build them from source, and that's across all major language ecosystems. And the reason we do this is now customers can consume them in a variety of different ways. So that could be in the form of secure container images, or that could even be in the form of direct access to those packages themselves for use in a tool like an artifact repository. And so really our goal at ActiveState is to provide teams with a single source for secure and trusted open source that help software development teams improve their security posture without really getting in the way of developers, making sure that developer velocity is moving forward with no friction. And so, okay, let's talk about the report really quickly. So a couple of years ago, we started doing this vulnerability management and remediation report, and we went out into the world and we surveyed a bunch of DevSecOps leaders. So you can think titles like, head of app security, CISOs, a lot of engineering leadership, as well as people in the DevOps world, so platform engineers, these sorts of things. And we asked them really how they are managing the open source vulnerabilities, the CVEs that are propping up in their environments. And so late last year, we started doing the survey again, and we just published the newest edition at the start of this year, which is the Container Security Edition. And we did that exact same thing, except we laser focused in on container images, the open source in those images, how teams are managing and dealing with vulnerabilities. And so again, this report has a lot of useful statistics, but really I think it's got a lot of interesting insights on how teams are working with containers, how they're thinking about adopting them, the roadblocks they're running into, and really some of the tactics teams are looking to implement to overcome them. And so without further ado, let's get into why we're actually here today to talk to you about some of the data in that report. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch over. Okay, Morris, we titled part one of this presentation, The Container Security Paradox. And the reason for doing this is really the contrast between two key stats in the report. I think, if you're looking at the screen, the shocking number right here is that of all the leaders we surveyed, 82% of them said they have likely experienced at least one container-related security incident in the past 12 months. I think taken alone, that's a bit shocking. That startled me when this report came back. But in contrast, we also heard that essentially every single respondent thinks of containers as an important piece of their development strategy. Across the stats there, 51% said somewhat important, 49% responded very important. So effectively, we're looking at 100% of people we went out and talked to said that containers are important in some way to their strategy. And so, to me, this suggests there's a massive gap when you look at the rate of container adoption versus the security measures that have sort of evolved alongside them. Morris, before we dive into this data, is this level of near universal adoption something you're seeing from our customers in the field? What do you think is actually driving this?
Thank you, Evan. That's exactly what I see with the customers and even prospects that are engaging with us. When we talk to DevOps team or SecDevOps, we do see that even if not all of their workload right now, which is production or even a dev or stage environment, either on or using containers today or moving towards the modern software deployment methods. So we do see that correlation. And the questions that we usually see are around how to build those securely and how to understand what inherent risk are they introducing into those environments as well. So the conversation really go and revolve around understanding how to build those environments, what components to integrate with, what components are being introduced, and how to understand how to manage those components as well. We do understand that containers, that the container or the image service technology itself is not new, but we do see newer use cases right now that drive a lot of the open source adoption as well.
Right, and so I agree. I think containers, it's not so surprising to me that everyone's sort of interested in using these or adopting them in some way. But I think when you go back to the other side of this data, that 82% number, 82% said they likely experienced at least one container-related incident. That is a staggering number. Morris, what do you think is happening here? I have some ideas, but what do you think is causing these incidents and sort of is the main source of that disconnect?
I think the easiest thing, the easiest reason is lack of visibility, or the speed. Container by design increase speed and flexibility when it comes to deployment. It's as easy as download a container and deploy that into your environment. But what we do see, there's a lack of understanding of what components go into that container, what components go and build those open source layers, and then the application layer on top of it. So it's really around visibility and understanding how to minimize or at least even manage those components within your ecosystem. And frankly, because it's so easy and consistently rapid to deploy those, we do see many deployments that are getting way bigger and out of control, to a point where you might have hundreds of containers, and it's really difficult to track the versions, the deployments, the type of containers you have in your environment, and usually that leads to those incidents and those concerns actually.
Right. Yeah. And I think the fact that, today's sort of status quo on where people are, beginning their container development cycles with is, public repositories, makes that visibility problem, even a little bit more intense, where you're saying like, hey, it's hard to even understand what's going on inside of these. And I think when you realize containers are running in production environments, they're handling, some of today's most critical workloads, touching a bunch of sensitive data, like when a breach happens, this 82% number, like, I think really highlights how huge that blast radius could be.
Exactly, I completely agree with that. And it's the fact of the matter is that it's so easy to download a container nowadays. It's as easy as going to Docker and download any container that you need to use or even to test. But it presents a very interesting dilemma from a security point of view, that it comes with inherent risk as well in most cases.
Right. So here's a further breakdown of some of those responses. And again, sort of the thing that stands out to me here is that, this is the same data we looked at before, just expanded out to see all of the responses. And you can see that 0% of respondents thought that it was very unlikely that they've experienced any sort of some container security incident in the past 12 months. And so I think more like we're sort of left with this situation where containers are clearly mission critical technology at this point. I don't think anyone would argue with that, but they're also proving to be a massive liability. And so, like, Morris, you're out in the field every day. How are you talking with customers about this tension? What do you think is the clear takeaway here?
That's a good question. That kind of leads a lot of that concern that we're seeing in the field right now. The most important thing to understand is the tools that are being used today to monitor, deploy, update, and govern those containers. A lot of those conversations go around or deal with the Wiz of the world, with the Snyk and other solutions that allow them visibility into those containers, even from a sheer management perspective. And I think an important piece of it is to understand how they're structured. We start with the base container, which is the first layer, and then there's another layer on top of it, which might be the language layer that needs to be adapted to your requirements and needs. And then there is the application layer on top of it. So understanding that each layer has its own requirements, needs, and governance is something that we see a lot in terms of information lacking with a lot of our prospects and customers.
Right, and I think that's sort of the perfect segue into the next sort of set of data we've got here, because this set is sort of all about, the traditional approaches. So, things are changing, containers have been sort of moving into the spotlight, but a lot of the data we uncovered sort of suggests that what people have been doing in the past to keep up with vulnerabilities are not really scaling. And Morris, you mentioned visibility at the top of this webinar, and I think the next slide is going to uncover a little bit about what that actually looks like. And so, when we say visibility, oops, sorry, we're just looking for the right slide here. There we go. Okay. So going back to visibility, like, what do we actually mean with that? Are teams able to identify, track, and understand the vulnerabilities that might exist in their environment? And so one of the things we did in this report is we asked leaders, how likely it was that limited visibility into the components or the contents of their container images was to be really one of the biggest blind spots for them. And combined, the likely and very likely responses, again, made up 91% of all respondents. And so, again, I think that is a kind of a crazy number, that near 91% of respondents seem to struggle with understanding what's going on in their images. And Morris, does this resonate with what you're seeing, kind of going back to talking about that problem? Why do you think visibility is so hard in the container images? Can't I just, pull an image and see what's inside of it?
That's a good question. It's always about understanding how your environment is built. Um, it was an exercise that we did with a few of our customers leading up to this report as well. Just understanding what an SBOM is. Just pulling an SBOM, which is a software bill of materials of their specific containers, and scanning that across the entire environment. That resulted in a very interesting outcome of vulnerabilities. And then when we look at the vulnerabilities, we can see a very interesting distribution between vulnerabilities in their code, vulnerabilities in their application, vulnerabilities in their base containers. And a lot of it was in their base containers. A lot of those vulnerabilities came from the base containers. And it was only apparent when you dive into the SBOM and you understand the versions and the components and the bloated, in some cases, bloated containers that they were running. They were not really optimized to their needs, but they were serving a purpose. They were serving a purpose to run the application, but it was not nearly as secure or as slimmed down or as minimal of a container that they could have run in their production environment. So that tracks very well with the visibility, because when you understand the level of complexity that you have in even a single base container, then you understand what a base container should look like between a production environment and a staging environment. And those are different containers as well, but that visibility is required. And a good first step was an SBOM download and an SBOM comparison to or with your scanner or with your existing scanner.
Right, so maybe Morris, like even jumping a bit further into this, when leaders kind of talk about visibility gaps, like what else are they not seeing? I'm thinking there's things like, hey, I've got some open source in my container. What are the transitive dependencies? Maybe it's something even as simple as like, I don't know what version of the library is in there. I don't know what version of the language is in there. Is there anything else that is sort of easy to overlook when you're talking about the software inside an image?
Yes, so that's a big sticking point with customers. Even when we do see secure base containers being downloaded, let's say the market does provide a base container with some core Python, for example, or Java or Node. And then what happens is that that specific environment is secure, but it's nearly not compatible with your application needs. So what we do see a lot of our customers do is they start with a secure base container, but then they expand based on their needs. They add more libraries, they add more dependencies. All of a sudden, the Python dependencies or the libraries that have been added do expose additional risk. It could be because of a version or a specific version that has known vulnerabilities, and the lack of visibility to understand that that specific version has 2 or 3 critical vulnerabilities, but a more recent version might not have that, is something that we do need to ingrain with our customers and understand that any environment is a dynamic environment. We always talk about downloading or building a container, but there is always a consistent effort to maintain that container secure, because that container might change and will change as your application needs evolve. So that visibility into the transient dependencies and the complex environment of the entire container across time is something that we do urge our customers to understand and track consistently as well.
Right, and I think this connects to the next part of what's on the screen here. So another finding is 83% of the leaders said that outdated base images are probably what's contributing to their most recent vulnerabilities, with 56% of respondents says this is sort of the usual case, and 27% says this is frequently the case, that outdated base images are sort of the main source of their vulnerabilities. And so, like, Morris, I guess, like, can you help me explain, like, what is really the pain in just updating those images? Can I not just go and grab, you know, the latest version? Like, what is making this so challenging to keep up with, you know, my starting point, really?
It's a question that a lot of DevOps deal with on a daily basis. I would segment that into 2 main reasons. One is the sheer resources needed to understand and to maintain such environments. We can see, obviously, as a maintainer and over 40 million components in our environment, we do see many vulnerabilities on a daily basis that we have to update. It's clearly not the same case for a lot of our customers, but it's a continuous effort. It's not something you can do once a quarter, or even once a month. Depends on your environment. So you continuously are chasing vulnerabilities and their attack vector, whether you're exposed to them or not. And the second one is breaking changes that we do see a lot. In many cases where we see a delay in updating libraries, let's say for months, because of lack of resources or priorities, the upgrade or the update to the next one might actually break some dependencies or some first-party code, and that delays even further those updates. So it's extremely important to keep those updated as frequent as possible, and understand that even if there are breaking changes, how would those impact your first-party code, and what are the needed updates that I would recommend a DevOps or even an engineering team to introduce into their CI/CD environment. And it's something we can talk about a little bit more in depth later.
So, let's shift to the next data point then, because I think there's a pretty clear connection here in terms of what we just talked about, in terms of this lack of visibility and organizations struggle with compliance. So another sticking point in the report is that 78% of organizations reported having likely failed a compliance audit due to the fact that there is sort of, some threshold of unresolved CVEs in their container images. And so, Morris, I'd like, as someone who's sort of a little bit away from that, can you give any insight into what's actually happening in these audits? I don't think it's just going to be as simple as them asking, hey, do you have the right scanning tools put into your pipeline, and that's it, and you're done. But is this more about how can teams actually produce the evidence that they're sort of remediating these CVEs? Is there a process they're looking for that you have in place? What are they actually looking for in these audits?
That really ties to the specific audit that they're running. We could talk about SOC 2 audits. We could talk about anything to do with FedRAMP compliance. The EU is coming up with new regulation as well. And a lot of it is tied to identifying severity, understand how to deal with those components when. Sometimes we even have a timeline of 7 days for FedRAMP to fix a critical vulnerability. So you are under a very specific timeline to identify, remediate, test, and validate. Another one is to keep auditability around your containers. So even if something has been remediated, you still have to show the evidence and the SBOM before and after to show that that has been remediated fully based on the recommendation that the tool has provided. So it's a lot of effort around not just visibility, but auditability around what the teams are doing, what processes are in place to identify the severity and follow the audit requirements. And we do see that being a huge factor moving forward with a lot of our customers, where they have literally 7 days or 12 days or 15 days to fix higher critical vulnerabilities. And they have to demonstrate that process is continuously done across the entire production and sometimes even staging environments. So it's a lot more rigorous, and we do see a lot more effort that goes into those requirements.
Right. So really, it's all about not only having the right tools in place, the right processes in place, but really being able to do this on a continual basis where you're not really stressing or putting a bunch of friction back on the security team or the engineering team to say hey, you've got to go do these 10 things on a recurring basis. It's really about sort of success is about streamlining that and making sure repeatability of being able to deliver that is feasible.
And as much automation as possible is kind of the key word here. When you deal with secure and base containers as your first step, that reduces a lot of those requirements or necessary updates on your cadence. Removing those, even when we talk about base containers that would inherit as they move forward vulnerabilities because they're not being updated, that is something that you can very easily remediate by updating just the base container, just the first layer that your entire stack is on. Continuously updating that base container would allow you to meet those requirements a lot easier in a very automated way that you can tie into your CI/CD or into your deployment process or even evaluation process as well.
Right. And I think, connecting that back to the other stat on the screen here, and this one actually isn't from our research, but we've included it as well, as we found that in early 2025 alone, 2,200 fines were handed out to organizations for non-compliance. And so I think we're seeing like the consequences of this really start to stack up. And Morris, I've got to imagine, with so many fines, that's some serious financial impact to organizations that I think is probably worth avoiding.
Yes, the fines are more of a consequence of failing an audit, but the risk, it goes a lot higher when you have attack vectors that might expose you on a production environment, and it can cause to a breach of data or information. So it's always a good idea to spend as much time as needed to secure those environments and make sure that the foundation layer of your entire stack is as secure as possible.
Right. All right, so let's go on to the next point here. And I think this is where things start to get really interesting. So we also asked a lot of questions around this concept of curated catalogs. And when we say curated catalogs, what we mean is sort of the traditional approach of, the paved path to production, a golden image, really putting in the effort to sort of self-vendor in your own open source to put some guardrails around what you're using and how you're using it. And so we asked DevSecOps leaders again, how much do you trust this concept of a curated catalog as opposed to just sort of having open access to a public registry, whether that's Docker Hub for containers, or maybe for something smaller like a language library, it's access to, something like a PyPy or an NPM. And so that's interesting. We saw that 77% of leaders trust this concept. They think there's some value in doing this work. But then at the same time, we saw that 90% of respondents said that they still just use lightly modified public images with little to no additional hardening or security work done on them. And so, Morris, what do you think is going on there? I think it's really interesting that everyone's saying, yeah, there's a lot of value in going out and sort of curating what we should use, putting some guardrails around it. But then at the same time, to me, it seems like convenience just wins out. It's like, hey, well, I need an image. It's on Docker Hub. Let's just grab it and go.
You're 100% correct. What we do see is that it's just a convenience. As if you can run a simple command as Docker pull and download the image that you need at that moment from a wide repository of variations, it just presents a very enticing process. If you need a Python build on, let's say, Python 13 or Node or Java, it's much easier to just run a pull command and download that and then start working with it. Where a curated catalog or a curated repository will require authentication. It's more of a gated environment. But there's a difference between a point in time and a continuous security. And this is where we see those roads kind of diverge. It's a lot easier to download something that is a point in time security that hasn't been updated maybe in a while, or present something that is very generic because it's more of a catch-all. It will have bloated environment, it will have root access, it will have a package manager, because that specific container is a public container that tries to accommodate as many use cases as possible. And when you switch to a more secure, minimal, hardened container, if it's a production environment, then you're not going to have a package manager, you're not going to have root access, you're not going to have secrets. So yes, it's going to be more locked down. It's going to be tailored to a production environment. So it will require some modification and adjustments, but you will always have and start with a secure environment. And then when you switch to a dev environment, again, the same thing. It's not just downloading a container, but it's downloading a secure container continuously across your SDLC or your SSDLC, where it ties to your deployments. So whenever you have to deploy a new code, you can pull in a container. I'm not going to say the container specific, because it might be the same snapshot of a container from 3 or 4 or 5 weeks ago that might have a vulnerability in it, but it's a container that is continuously scanned, updated, and monitored for vulnerability. So when you download that container from a curated catalog that is managed for you, someone else is making sure that that specific container is always secure at any point in time, not just the first time you've downloaded it.
Yeah, Morris, I want to touch on what you just said, like this idea of managed for you, because I think that's one of the reasons why doing this approach in-house is so difficult, because you can go and your DevOps team can say, like, here are the images we're going to use for the business. We can pull those into a repository. If you want to get more granular, of course, they could do this for language dependencies as well. You could choose which ones your team has access to. But like you said, that's sort of stuck in a point in time. Then that team has to go and make sure, like, okay, is a patched version of that available? Or are we going to bring it back into the catalog? Keeping up with this over time is just a huge project management process for like a DevOps team to go and manage. And so I think another reason why we see teams just defaulting to the public is like that model doesn't scale particularly well. And I'm sure we've talked to customers where they've said, hey, we're trying to do some hardening in-house. And then I think pretty quickly they either can't keep up with that idea or start talking with the vendor about, getting it from a source that isn't their own team.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the realization that a lot of our customers are facing. Yes, you can safely build containers, and yes, you can maintain them. The question is, do you want your DevOps or your DevSecOps, your IT, your engineering team, sometimes your development team as well, to be focused on building and maintaining containers, or do you want them to build and maintain the product the company is shipping, the first-party code, the improvements of your platform? So we do see that with the requirements that are coming up and the dynamic nature of the industry, specifically how containers and container security is being handled, there is a very linear progression or increase of time being spent on containers. So if in the past it was relatively simple, you download a Docker container, you run your application, maybe you run some tests on it, and you run an update on it once every couple of months. Now we see that teams are investing a significantly more time and resources into making sure that those environments are secure, and it is draining a lot of their internal resources to a point where it's no longer cost effective for them to do that in-house. And this is where they're attempting to outsource the entire creation and the maintenance of those containers to a company that can provide that security on a regular basis, continuously.
Right, so let's jump ahead. And I think based on these past few slides we've looked at, to me, it's fairly clear that sort of generally the strategies teams are leveraging to manage, remediate vulnerabilities in their containers specifically is just not really keeping pace with today's landscape. And so I think if you want to draw some sort of connective line between what we just talked about, it seems like teams are either failing to identify vulnerabilities, finding them, but just not keeping pace with them. And sort of the combined output of that is CVEs are building up, teams are potentially failing audits, or worse, we talked about, there could even be a security breach as a kind of result of this. And I think this number, or like these outcomes, are sort of especially crazy when you consider we also ask teams, like, how high of a priority is it for you to invest in a hardened container solution, sort of what Morris was just talking about for your organization? And 98% ranked it as either a high priority or a very high priority. And so, Morris, like, do you have any thoughts at all on how we might explain this gap between sort of intention versus execution? Is this something you're seeing out in the market at all, where people are invested in solving this problem, but they're not really closing the gap on actually doing it?
Yes, and I explained this with a very simple example. We were involved in a very simple conversation with a customer that has a production environment, a very big production environment. They made an executive decision to reduce their vulnerabilities to by 95%, a very important goal. And then when they started to dive into the containers and the environment itself, they realized the level of technical debt they have there. I'm not going to share exactly the numbers, but it was the tens of thousands of vulnerabilities across multiple environments. And once you see that report, you understand that this is something that will take you months to fix. That realization that you got to shift resources from your main delivery to maintain, to remediate those environments creates a very strong barrier. And it can go and expand to development or to the developer team, because they will be breaking changes, because using a very old version of the application and then updating to a newer version will break some functionality. And IT will be required to invest time and resources to automate this. So I do see that gap between a very important goal and desire to update and keep those environments up to date, and the realization that this will require a change in how companies deal with security, how companies build containers, how deploy them, how to even test them, and what are the acceptance criteria moving forward. So that gap is difficult to traverse initially, but once you keep up with those requirements consistently, then the lift becomes a lot smaller. But that initial scary gap is where I see a lot of customers struggle with, just to traverse that big technical debt that has accumulated in that environment.
Right, and I think, just a minute ago, we were talking about sort of the effort engineering has to do to keep up with some of this as well. Maybe they view investing as doing this work themselves. And I think this slide maybe also gives some insight into just like, what do companies actually think is worth it? And I think the takeaway is probably they think developing, like you said, first-party code is what is worth it. Like, you want to have the engineering talent you hired write code that's going to push your business forward, and having them do work to do security work, whether that's, hardening container images or whatever it may be, that is undifferentiated engineering work for that team. Like, that you did not hire them to do this. It is not pushing, the revenue model of your business forward. And so I think, that for companies who are thinking of, investing in hardened containers by doing that in-house, I think what we're seeing is a bit of sort of business value triumphing over, security in that case. Okay, so let's go to the last slide. And so I think, or not the last slide, I don't know what I'm talking about, but we've talked a lot about the negatives in this report, some of the doom and gloom around container security challenges. But we also in this report asked teams, a lot about what are they hopeful for and what do they see as the path forward to start solving some of these challenges in 2026. And so I think perhaps to no one's surprise, one of the main points was considerations around AI and automation. And I was actually, to be honest with you, personally a little surprised how optimistic leaders seem to be around AI and specifically how it relates to vulnerability management. So we found that not only do 95% of respondents believe that some form of intelligent remediation and automation will become a standard practice in 2026, but basically 100% of respondents said they're either likely or very likely to use AI in some capacity to prioritize vulnerabilities in their organization. And so, Morris, before we jump into like what does this actually mean and how might a team actually leverage AI in this capacity, or even like a solution that would use it, what do you think is driving this enthusiasm? Is it just the nature that leaders want to jump on the hype of AI, or is there actually something real to be excited here? Like, does AI actually have a meaningful role in remediation?
I believe it does. That's the sheer pace of change of what's coming today and what we're dealing with today. Again, we managed in the 40 million components that we manage, the amount of vulnerabilities that we see being published, being tracked, being remediated, it's really difficult to keep up with the amount of change and the speed of it with conventional tools today. So AI will and has a very big role in that ecosystem right now. And I see that actually increasing as we move forward.
Right, and so I think, if I'm an attendee in this webinar and we're talking about intelligent remediation and AI in this, I think my first question would be what would this actually look like in practice? And we don't have to go into, use X, Y, and Z tools, but what would AI's role be in this? Is it just that they would help teams prioritize those CVEs by saying hey, let's give it something access to our code and it can maybe do, I don't know, analysis to see whether or not the CVE actually affects the code that developers have written? Is it, automating the sort of patching of, the open source components themselves? Where would you see AI actually having meaningful impact in this process?
Well, it will have in all of them. And one good
Yeah.
example is breaking changes, for example, which we provide that specific service as well. So our ability to understand even a simple thing as where you are today and where you need to go in order to be secure, and what you have to do to traverse that gap, that upgrade, or that update. Given we have to provide the tools to understand, is this is something I can do in 3 months? Is this something that I'll have to do in a year and a half? How would that impact my code? How would that impact my environment? Those tools are required in order to make informed decisions. Now, we use them internally as well because we kind of drink our own champagne. Even a simple vulnerability test that allows us to understand that specific library is updated. This is the change log that has been implemented. This is how it's going to impact the environment. And this is what you need to do to, in order to keep that environment secure, allows us to integrate with our AI solution and make sure that we can make informed decisions, and we can make them in a way that will involve the least amount of resources, but will get us the fastest result possible. And it goes beyond that as well. We see AI being used in so many ways today, just to make sure that executives can make the right decisions. And at the end of the day, finite amount of resources, you have X amount of hours that you can invest. You need to make sure where you have the right information to understand where you want to invest those resources. And a simple example would be whether you want to upgrade a specific library, or whether you want to change a specific component, or whether you need to change your application layer to support those security requirements. And a lot of that is driven by AI and LLMs today.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. Okay. I'm going to try and do some quick slide gymnastics because I think one of them got misordered. So let me see if I can jump over back a few to get there. And then we will hit the last point. All right, here we go. So last thing to talk about in sort of looking forward, and I think, Morris, this one's really going to resonate with both yourself and me, is that organizations are also starting to understand, and we talked about this, that managing container security themselves is something they don't have to take out or take on alone. And so to close out the report, we asked teams if adopting and implementing custom container images to meet their requirements, whether that's sort of like an audit requirement or an internal security requirement, is something they're looking to do in 2026. And by custom image, we really mean images that are managed for you. The CVEs are sort of remediated on your behalf, and they really only contain the exact pieces of software you need to run your applications. And so, like we said on the screen, 60% of people said that they are likely to implement something like this. 39% said very likely. So the vast majority of the people we interviewed are looking to, take advantage of some form of custom image. And so, Morris, like we talked about it, but what would, again, just to hit home, like what are the advantages of sort of offloading, managing container images from your own organization?
So the immediate advantages would be time, efficiency, and cost.
Yeah.
It's extremely important to understand that offloading a curated catalog or even a container to a company that can continuously remediate and keep that container secure is something that would save companies a tremendous amount of time. And I always stress this, and I'll stress this again. There are multiple layers to container security. The third layer, or the application layer, is not something I would outsource very easily because that's your IP, that's your proprietary, and you want to focus all your effort and resources into that. But building a secure container, building a secure language and dependencies and libraries is something you can very easily outsource to a company that focuses on that specific secure deployment continuously, and then reduce the dependency of your team in even tooling, in existing tooling, even understanding how to take a component from and understanding whether you need that in your environment or not. And a simple thing that I usually see that resonates a lot with our customers is that we have flavors of containers. And I'll explain what that means. We have containers that have been designed for production environment that are hardened, secure, and locked down. They have the least amount of components needed to run your application. And we have the same version, but for a development environment that has a few more components like a root access and a package manager that allows developers to very easily engage and use those containers. And then when they move to the production environment, they use the same container, but that was designed for that specific environment. So the entire the need to maintain differences between environments is being handled by the vendor itself. So not only that the vendor builds and customizes the containers per the application needs, it can create different flavors or different deployment methods or deployment versions to support production and development environments. So that reduces even further the need for DevOps to spend time to maintain those components. And continuously, this is something that's being scanned, deployed, and updated as we move forward.
Right. So Morris, I know you and the entire team at ActiveState have been working with a lot of customers on container images over the past few months, really. And so maybe I can just tap on you to give one final sort of statement about how we can help if someone wants to come talk to us about container images. What are we there to support with?
That's a great question. What we're there to support really is to make sure that you have a secure environment. One of the other things that I want to understand, I want our customers and the audience to understand is that customization of containers is not a bad word. It's something that we really need to spend time to think about. How do we take a container and not customize our needs to what the container provides, but the other way around? We can take the container and the environment and customize it to the customer needs. This is really what we've been spending the last 6-7 months focusing on, is understanding how can we build the most secure, the most minimalist, and the most hardened container to support our customers and build them in a way that is fully customized to their specific use cases. So it's no longer one container fits all. One container has to be built to support every possible use cases. It's the other way around. Use cases are driving how the containers are being built and how they're being supported and deployed. So if there's anything I would love the audience to take, is that's where we focus. We focus on really tailoring the environment, the container, the builds, the components that go into that build to the use cases that our customers need. And the second part of it is continuously doing that. So once we have an SBOM of the requirements that are needed to be supporting that environment, we will continuously monitor those components. We will continue provide suggestions and updates and security feedback on what has been updated, what needs to be updated, and what needs to be changed in those containers, which allows our customers the freedom to build on top of it without the risk of spending too much time or failing compliance requirements when it comes to container management.
Amazing. Thank you, Morris. And so we've come to the end of our slides. And so I just want to mention, I believe everyone who's attending today's session will receive a copy of the report as follow-up. But if you do want to grab it now, the QR code is on the screen. And this is just a sample of the data that's available in the report. We pulled out a couple stats we thought were worth chatting through and sort of made sense to talk about for today's webinar. But all of these statistics go into more detail in the report. And so I'd encourage everyone to grab a copy and take a read through themselves. And with that, Michael, I think that's everything we've got, so we can go on to questions.
Terrific, and thank you so much, both of you, for the presentation. And to get into our Q&A, a reminder, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or click on the Q&A icon. And if we can't answer your questions, we'll be sure to share them with Morris and Evan, who can get back to you offline. Okay, so let's get going. Our first question comes from Andres, who asks, how do you handle resistance from development teams who see security requirements as just slowing them down?
I would love to take that. I'm a developer myself. It's very difficult, and I completely understand that question, because developers should not be security-driven per se. They should not be spending most of the time on security. They should be writing code that is secure. So the resistance is is warranted. What we see mostly is that there is a collaboration between teams. And this is where we see the most amount of impact. When we have a conversation with DevOps, IT, and developer and development teams, we do see a share in responsibility. I don't think, from my experience, that this is 100% on the development team. This has to be shared across those three different groups. That makes it easier to understand and implement. Not only that, but it allows for automation. And this is the key operative word here. I would not want to see my developers remediating vulnerabilities in a container or remediating vulnerabilities in Python. I would like them to spend as much time as possible delivering their Jira task or the roadmap or the product roadmap specifically as it pertains to their stories. So I want to see that collaboration. There is a requirement for developers to be part of it, but not to own it. And this is where I see where customers are most successful when it's shared across those teams.
Mm-hmm. And this is a battle that I think has been going on for as long as computers have existed. Keep the questions coming. This one is from Dave, who says, what metrics should we be tracking to measure the success of our container security program?
That's a good question. It depends on what internally your executive team is really asking you to deliver. The best metrics that I would recommend is to understand how many vulnerabilities are being discovered, how many vulnerabilities are being exposed, how many of them are critical, prioritizing them based on their score, and really understanding where you need to put your emphasis on, where you need to focus. The tools provide a lot of noise. And when you run every report, it will generate, because they're designed to generate as much information as possible. And they're very scary. And the biggest problem is to prioritize what is important and what is not important. What is something that has low attack vector or low exposure, or something that you can remediate down the line, is something that I would highly recommend customers focusing on and building their matrix on top of it. Because that customer that I gave example for had thousands of vulnerabilities. Their first reaction was, I don't know how to deal with this. This is too big for us to deal with. And when you break it down, you understand that 80% of it was not their application. 80% of it was the container. So once they made one simple change, they removed the Ubuntu and the Debian containers, and they moved to a secure container that immediately remediated 80% of their vulnerabilities. So focus on the things that have the best possible results and where you can remediate quickly and have a higher impact on your environment.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Keep them coming. This one from Stephen, who asks, can you be a little more specific as to the nature of the security incidents or breaches that you're seeing and referring to?
So Morris, I can start on this, at least in the context of the report. And I think, obviously we asked sort of a blanket question to these organizations about, can you tell us if you believe you've experienced some sort of security incident? And so, we weren't looking for specifics around the what, why, and how as to sort of, encourage respondents to give us accurate answers into what they believed happened. But I think, Morris, without naming names, we probably have worked with some customers where we have seen, them come to us after experiencing a real incident. So I don't know if you've got any context or stories kicking around in the back of your head to put you on the spot, but maybe we can sort of provide some color to what, we didn't ask necessarily.
Yeah, well, NDAs prohibit me from sharing that type of information. But yeah, unfortunately, we do see those occurrences where a breach, data leak, an exposure, public exposure, has started the conversation, or has forced the conversation with us. I'm not going to say that by then it's too late, because it's never too late to secure an environment, but the time frame of which you have to operate in becomes a lot shorter. And it's really usually around outdated libraries. It's very much something that could have been resolved by a simple update, or at least maintaining a more up-to-date environment. But we do see that a lot of them are really tied to that technical gap or tech gap between where they started the environment and where they ended up today, and the amount of vulnerabilities that they're carrying over across time. So I can go to specific ones um, if anybody would like more data around those specific or use cases and vulnerabilities. I'll be happy to send them over. So just reach out to us. I'll reach out to myself or Evan directly, and then we'll send you more detailed information.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Morris. Keep them coming. We have time for just a couple more questions. This one comes from Claire, who asks, what's the most common blind spot that you see in organizations who think they have container security covered?
Visibility, 100%. A lot of the conversation is like, are you aware of what you have? And the answer is usually, I think I am. And then we dive into it. We very quickly realize that they don't. There's a lot of blind spots, a lot of holes that the infrastructure has evolved beyond their ability to even track. So it's always interesting that we start with one image and then all of a sudden there are 50 containers of that specific image. And those images have changed a little bit, and someone downloaded the package or they changed something in the configuration. And it's really difficult to keep track of all those changes. There are tools and there are solutions that help you, but the sheer understanding that it is a very dynamic environment that changes almost on a daily basis. And to say that you have a good visibility without having a good infrastructure, good tooling around it, and good vendors that can provide you with support is something that I would always challenge.
And let's try and squeeze in one last question. This one comes from Ron, who asks, how do you assess the security posture of open source projects before you include them in a container?
How much time do we have for that question?
just a couple of minutes.
That's a great question. It's a very strong question at kind of the foundation of why ActiveState has been doing it for so long. It's a really big combination of understanding needs, understanding what the code is, what customers are using the code for. It dives into the maintenance of the libraries themselves, the versions. I would love to show you even like a simple example of, even if we track like a TensorFlow package or any package that we track it from the beginning, from the first version that we added that specific component into our ecosystem to where it is today. So we have full visibility, not only to the last 2-3 versions, but to all the versions available. So we have the full history of the changelog, what has been implemented, how many issues have been found and remediated in that specific library. So there is, when we say 40 million, it's a little bit higher than that, but it's because we have visibility and we track everything we can track about the aspects of the containers and the components that we have. And this is something I tell all our customers: containers are open source. It's just a different packaging system. If we talk about curated catalog, it's open source, delivered as a curated catalog to your artifact repository. Containers are just encapsulation of open source, a very thin, a very lightweight encapsulation of open source, but it is open source through and through. So always think about it as just open source. So think of the operating system as an open source delivery that you have to maintain and keep up to date as well. But I'll stop here, I know, because we have a few minutes and I would love to dive even deeper.
And I want to thank you both. Thanks, Morris and Evan. That's all the time we have for questions today. And Dark Reading, really appreciate your time and expertise on today's topic. And thanks to our sponsor, ActiveState, as well as to all of you in the audience. We appreciate your attention and participation in the Q&A. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to join us live today. This webinar is copyright 2026 by Informa Tech Target. Presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and ActiveState, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our guests, ActiveState, and the Dark Reading team, I'm Michael Krieger. Thanks for your time. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next one.